April 13, 1970. More than 300,000 kilometers from Earth, three astronauts were drifting through the darkness. The moon was behind them. Home was still days away. Then, a loud bang echoed through the spacecraft. The lights flickered. Warning alarms came alive, and one of the astronauts looked out of the window. Something was wrong, very wrong. Gas was venting into space. An entire side of the spacecraft seemed to be disappearing before their eyes. A few moments later, one of the most famous messages in history reached Mission Control. Houston, we've had a problem. For the next 4 days, the entire world held its breath, because 3 men were stranded in space, with dwindling power, little water, and almost no margin for error. This is the story of the astronauts we almost lost, and the people who refused to let them go. Space has always inspired wonder, but it has never been safe. Every launch, every orbit, every journey beyond our atmosphere has carried risks that are almost impossible to comprehend. Because in space, there is no room for mistakes, no roadside assistance, no rescue helicopters, no quick return home, just fragile machines and human beings suspended in an environment that wants to kill them. Yet time and time again, against extraordinary odds, people have survived, not because they were lucky, but because of courage, ingenuity, and thousands of people refusing to give up. This is not a story about tragedy. It is a story about survival, and it begins with Apollo 13. By April of 1970, landing on the moon was beginning to feel routine. Apollo 11 had made history. Apollo 12 had succeeded as well. Apollo 13 was supposed to be another mission, another step forward. Instead, it became one of the greatest rescue missions ever attempted. The crew consisted of Jim Lovell, Fred Haise, and Jack Swigert. Everything seemed normal, until 55 hours into the flight. Mission Control asked the crew to perform a routine procedure: stir the oxygen tanks, a task that had been done many times before. Swigert flipped the switch. Seconds later, the spacecraft shook violently. At first, nobody understood what had happened. Then the alarms began. Fuel cells started failing. Oxygen levels were dropping. The astronauts watched in disbelief as vital systems slowly died. An oxygen tank had exploded, and with it, Apollo 13's moon landing was over. But much worse, the crew's chances of survival suddenly became uncertain. The command module was losing power. Without oxygen, without electricity, the astronauts would never make it home. The moon was now impossible. Returning to Earth was becoming doubtful. Back on Earth, Mission Control faced an impossible problem. How do you save 3 men who are hundreds of thousands of kilometers away? There would be no rescue mission, no second spacecraft. Everything depended on solving problems. One by one, the crew moved into the lunar module, a vehicle designed to support 2 astronauts for only a short period of time. Now, it would have to keep 3 men alive. For 4 days, temperatures inside the spacecraft dropped close to freezing. Water was rationed. The astronauts lost weight. Ice formed on the walls. And then another problem appeared: carbon dioxide. The air filters were slowly becoming overwhelmed. If nothing changed, the crew would suffocate. Back in Houston, engineers worked around the clock. They emptied boxes onto tables, plastic bags, cardboard, tape, hoses, anything the astronauts had on board. Their mission became simple: build a solution using only materials already in space. What followed was one of the greatest moments of human ingenuity: a strange-looking improvised device, held together with tape and determination. It worked. The carbon dioxide levels dropped. The astronauts lived. After nearly 6 terrifying days, Apollo 13 finally returned to Earth. On April 17th, the capsule splashed safely into the Pacific Ocean. Against extraordinary odds, All three men came home. Apollo 13 never landed on the moon, yet it became known as the successful failure, because failure was expected. Survival was not. But Apollo 13 was not the only time space came terrifyingly close to tragedy. 5 years earlier, another astronaut had come within seconds of death. His name was Neil Armstrong. Years before becoming the first man on the moon, Armstrong was piloting Gemini 8. The mission was historic. Its goal was the first docking of 2 spacecraft in orbit. At first, everything went perfectly. The docking succeeded. Humanity had achieved something new. Then, the spacecraft began to rotate. Slowly at first, then faster and faster. Armstrong initially believed the problem was with the target vehicle. He undocked, but the spinning continued. The problem was inside Gemini itself. A thruster had become stuck open. The spacecraft was now rotating uncontrollably, 1 revolution every few seconds. The astronauts' vision began to blur. Their bodies became heavier. Soon, they would black out, and once unconscious, they would never wake up. Armstrong had only moments to act. Calmly, methodically, he identified the problem, then made a decision. He activated the re-entry thrusters, a system meant for returning home. The spinning slowed, then stopped. Silence. The astronauts had survived, but the mission had to end immediately. Years later, many would look back on that day and realize something remarkable. If Armstrong had panicked, if he had waited only a little longer, the first man to walk on the moon may never have lived to see it. But danger in space does not only come from explosions or mechanical failures. Sometimes it comes silently. Without warning, in July of 2013, Italian astronaut Luca Parmitano stepped outside the International Space Station. It was supposed to be a routine spacewalk. Then he felt something unusual. Water. At first, only a few drops, then more. A leak had developed inside his helmet. In space, this is a nightmare. The water continued to rise. It entered his eyes, his ears, his nose. Soon, it became difficult to see, difficult to hear, even difficult to breathe. Remember, Luca was outside the station, floating in the vacuum of space, completely dependent on his suit. If the water covered his mouth, he could drown. In space, as more water accumulated, his vision disappeared completely. He was effectively blind, unable to see where he was, unable to see the station, unable to see safety. Later, he would describe the experience as deeply frightening. The instinct to panic was overwhelming. Yet somehow, he remained calm. Using memory and training, he slowly found his way back, hand over hand, into the airlock. Only after removing his helmet did everyone realize how serious the situation had been. Nearly 1.5 liters of water had filled the helmet. A little more, and the outcome might have been very different. These stories remind us of something important. Space exploration is often remembered through triumphs. The moon landing, beautiful photographs, historic firsts. But behind every achievement were moments like these. Moments when everything almost ended. Moments when astronauts trusted their training, and engineers on Earth refused to accept defeat. There were many others. Close calls aboard Soviet spacecraft, fires, collisions, explosive decompressions, entire stations that nearly became tombs. Again and again, humanity came frighteningly close to losing people among the stars. Yet every near miss taught valuable lessons. Procedures improved. Spacecraft became safer. Training became better. The lives almost lost helped protect future explorers. And perhaps that is why these stories matter so much. Because they remind us that exploration has always required courage. Not the absence of fear, but the willingness to move forward despite it. The astronauts knew the risks. They always did. They climbed aboard anyway. And on the ground, thousands of engineers, controllers, technicians, and scientists carried those risks with them. Sleepless nights, impossible decisions, The crushing responsibility of knowing that lives depended on every calculation. When we think about space exploration, it is easy to focus on rockets and machines. But at its heart, it has always been about people. People willing to leave Earth, people willing to risk everything, and other people who refused to let them go. Because every astronaut who came home did not come home alone. They were carried back by the efforts of thousands, and perhaps that is the most beautiful part of these stories. Not how close we came to tragedy, but how, time and time again, human beings chose to fight for one another, across impossible distances, against impossible odds, and won. Today, the stars still call to us. New missions are being planned. Astronauts will return to the moon, and one day, perhaps, humans will walk on Mars. When they do, they will carry with them the lessons learned from Apollo 13, from Gemini 8, from Luca Parmitano, and from every near miss that came before. Because every successful mission in the future will owe something to the astronauts we almost lost, and to the people who brought them home.